Greetings, ladies and gentlefish, and welcome to this review of the A-43 Soviet Tier 6 medium tank. Now, usually at the beginning of these I would give you a quick little historical rundown of the machine, but truth be told, I don't really know much more about this than any of you do. I only really know what's available from the information in the game client or from the game Wikipedia entry. Had a quick look for a bit more info, but you know, it's not that easy to actually find. So all I really know about this thing was that it was a design conceived to replace the T-34, basically. I can only speculate on why it was not successful, my speculation being that it didn't really offer that much that the T-34 didn't already offer. I mean, the main difference, as far as I can see, was that it was a different suspension. It didn't use the Christie suspension of the T-34, so perhaps there was a bit more room in the hull for additional crew members, or just more space for the existing crew members to work, maybe, I don't know. But either way, the T-34 was produced in vast numbers, and this was not. So there we go. Anyway, what is it that we get in-game? Well, I'm going to be making a lot of comparisons probably with the Cromwell, the British Tier 6 medium tank. Probably because it's quite similar to the Cromwell, but we'll get onto that a little bit more later. So what do you get? You get 730 hit points, which is perhaps slightly below average for a Tier 6 medium tank. You know, the average is, I guess, around 750, but it's not that far off the mark. 600 horsepower engine on a 27-ton tank gives you a specific power of 21.62 horsepower per ton. Yeah, can you start seeing the comparisons with the Cromwell yet? 55 km/h top speed limit, 44 degree a second traverse speed combined with a 48 degree per second turret traverse. Armour I'll talk a little bit more about later on, 60 on the front, 45 on the sides, 40 on the rear, and 75 all round on the turret. The gun I will talk about more in a moment. 360 meter view range and a 525 meter signal range. I mean, they're just the stats that are provided in the garage. Let's have a quick look at the gun selection. Now, this thing has 3 guns, but realistically it has 2 guns because you're not stupid. You could use the 76mm F3, but this is a garbage gun and I'm not even going to talk about it. I might briefly mention it when it comes to the grind, but essentially you already have both of the Tier 5 guns for this machine unlocked. Yes, that's right, Tier 5 guns on a Tier 6 machine, and you might start getting a little bit of a flavour of this tank. So what are the 2 guns in question? Well, these are just the same 2 top guns that you got on the T-34. Not a great deal has changed. I mean, they're a little bit beefed up maybe, but they're essentially the same 2 weapons. You have the 57mm IS-4 and the 76mm S-54. What's the difference between the 2? Well, the 57mm is slightly more accurate and has a higher rate of fire. The 76mm has higher penetration and higher alpha damage, is less accurate. They both have the same aim time, but one thing you have to bear in mind, in order to make proper use of the 57mm higher rate of fire, you really want to be firing every time the gun's reloaded, and this is one of those frustrating guns that can sometimes be in the habit of reloading faster than it aims. Now, the aim time is very good, but if you are at range, if you are having to move the turret a little bit, you can often find that your reload is you are reloaded before you're actually properly aimed on your target. It does have the better DPM, however, of the 2 guns, but in order to use that DPM, you have to really be continually firing at your target. And that's where you can start having problems. It has 112mm of penetration, which is, not to put too fine a point on it, garbage. And it has 85 alpha damage, which is also terrible. The 76mm has 125 penetration and 115 alpha damage, which are also not very good. They're approximately in line with the American 76mm M1A1 and M1A2 guns. So it's that sort of performance. But, you know, the main one of the other main differences between the 2, I guess, is that, well, 2 of the other main differences, the 76mm gets a better HE round, 165 alpha, 39 pen. The 57mm gets a higher penetration premium round, 189 pen with APCR compared to the 156 on the 76mm gun. Which gun should you use? It's going to come down to a matter of preference. Neither of them are massively exciting guns. The guns are not really the selling point on this tank, sort of. Yeah, sort of, I know, helpful, isn't it? I recommend the 76mm gun, because I think the higher alpha damage and the slightly higher penetration will probably be of more use to you. Whichever gun you choose, you actually have a higher DPM than the Cromwell, and the Cromwell has very nice DPM for a tier 6 medium tank. In fact, if you use the 57mm gun, you have substantially better DPM than the Cromwell, which is very nice, but you have to be continually firing in order to use that DPM, and despite the higher penetration APCR rounds of the 57mm, I think the 76mm is the way to go. It's the gun I used most of the time, and it's what I would recommend you use. I think all told, you will find it a superior weapon. So that's the guns. Let's talk a little bit about the grind. Okay, so we are dealing with Soviet medium tanks. So, in order to understand the grind of this thing, well, there's a variety of different ways you can get to it. There are 3 entirely different tech lines you could choose to access the A-43 or the T-34-85, basically whichever Soviet medium line you are interested in. You can either take the T-60, T-70 and T-80 up to tier 4, and then go to the T-34. All of these lines converge on the T-34. This line means that you don't have to play any tank with scout matchmaking, which is nice. These are sort of combat light tanks, if you will. The T-70 in particular at tier 3 is a very nice machine when it's top tier. These tanks tend to suffer a little bit when they're bottom tier because their mobility is not fantastic, and they are still light tanks, so their firepower is not the best. This line, you have the BT-2, which is blisteringly fast, the BT-7, which is blisteringly fast, and the A-20, which is less blisteringly fast, and generally considered a kind of dubious machine, but I don't know. I don't think it's completely terrible. Again, you don't have to play a tank with scout matchmaking, despite all these being light tanks. The A-20 got changed in that regard, and again you lead on to the T-34, or T-26 is alright, more focus on the gun. T-46 is alright. T-50 is okay, but does get scout matchmaking. So it's up to you whether you really want to play a scout or not at tier 4. Because the tier 4 scouts tend to be quite painful, I guess I'm going to recommend one of these other 2 lines to get there. Unless you want to do the Soviet heavies as well, and you've already gone down, you know, T-26, T-46, T-28, KV-1, etc. So then you converge on the T-34, the legendary tier 5 medium tank for the Soviets. And I've got a full review up of this machine if you're interested in it, so by all means go and check that out. It's a pretty decent all-round tank, there isn't that much more to say about it. But at this note I should mention that if you want to advance to the MT-25, you only need to go through the radios. If you want to advance to the Su-85, you only need to go through these guns, you don't need to go through these top guns. Turret and this 76mm gun. Ditto for the T-34-85, and if you want to go to the A-43, you don't need to unlock the ZIS-4 or the S-54 guns. But if you choose this option, if you choose not to unlock these 2 guns when you go for the A-43, you are a muppet, because you make the A-43 grind that much more painful. My advice, elite the T-34, it is not a bad machine, so elite it. Unlock everything before you advance to the next tier, at which point you get to the A-43. And if you have followed my advice, the only things you actually have to unlock on this tank are the top engine, unless you've already played the KV-2, T-150, KV-3, one of those. Do you have to unlock the top radio? No, you've already got that unlocked. So all you need to unlock is the top suspension, engine, and turret. The stock engine, 500 horsepower, next engine, 600. It's definitely worth the upgrade. The stock suspension can mount all modules apart from these 2, i.e. that's the 76mm gun and the upgraded turret. All the other modules you can mount on the stock suspension. So, my opinion on what you should unlock on this tank. Play it stock with the 57mm gun. This stock gun is utter garbage. It's left over from the T-34 and it has absolutely no place on a tier 5 medium tank, let alone tier 6. Upgrade the engine first for additional horsepower, then the suspension. Once you have upgraded the suspension, you have the weight allowance to switch the 57mm to the 76mm S54 if you choose to, and I do recommend this, but it's up to you whether you want to or not. Then you have to unlock the turret, bash it on, and then unlock the A-44. This is not a very painful grind at all. In fact, I actually had the top engine already unlocked from the KV2, so this was a very easy grind for me, and then I just knocked out the 56,000 experience for the A-44. It was not an unpleasant experience. When you have it fully upgraded, you have a mobile medium tank with a slightly underwhelming gun. Okay, I'm going to make the direct comparison with the Cromwell later on, but you end up, when fully elited, as I say, with quite a mobile, in fact a very mobile, machine, which is nice to have. Modules, consumables, crew skills, all that jazz. What should you probably take on it? Well, first aid kit, first aid kit, repair kit and fire extinguisher are what I've got. You could choose some others if you wanted, I guess, but I think these are a pretty decent default loadout. Modules, I would recommend gun rammer, and then you start hitting problems. I'm going to say gun rammer and improved vents. It increases your overall performance of the tank in the case of vents and gives you even higher DPM in the case of a gun rammer, which is nice. Looking at the other options available, I would have to suggest the binocular telescopes. Having superior view range is very important in a multitude of situations, and the 360 meter view range on this tank is a little underwhelming, meaning that if you equip binos, meaning that equipping optics is, it's not as useful as you might want it to be, so I recommend binos for that extra boost to your view range. Crew skills, safe storage on the loader is not a terrible idea. Sixth sense on your commander is a must. Repairs on everyone else, move on. Nothing particularly fancy. So without further ado, let's go and have a quick look at the armour scheme. Before we start on the armour scheme, one thing I did forget to mention in the garage is that this tank gets a very underwhelming 5 degrees of gun depression. Not exactly very good, and that can be quite frustrating. So, on with the armour. Rear of the hull, trash, 40mm. It's just about enough to shrug off the sort of high explosive rounds you tend to see at tier 6. Side armour, 45. Put some angling on it, and you can get close to 100mm at a very extreme angle. If they're shooting through your tracks as well, you start getting about 150 effective armour. But that does require a very extreme angle where it's just easier to shoot the front plate. Speaking of the front plate, there isn't really a lower front plate per se, because if you just look at the tank regularly, in fact sometimes people are shooting down on it ever so slightly, the lower plate is actually stronger than the upper plate. But that's only 60mm, most guns won't have problem penetrating it. If you do have a problem penetrating this thing, the machine gun port is a good place to shoot, as it might be the same thickness as the rest of the frontal hull, but it's not angled, so it's just 60mm of effective armour. Talking about the turret is 75mm all around, nothing particularly special. The gun mantlet, well, I mean, it's 75mm, but there's the odd bit that has some armour, but it really can't be relied upon. Basically assume that the entire front of the turret has an effective armour thickness of 75mm, and if you ever do decide to go hull down, you have to contend with the fact that you have this giant Great Commander's Tower on top, which is 60mm or 120 in 2 strips, but basically penetration city. In short, the armour on this tank is just about enough to shrug off high explosive rounds. The frontal armour plate is better than the T-34, but the side armour realistically is worse. It's technically slightly thicker, but the angling on it is non-existent because it lacks that Christie suspension. So that's the armour scheme. Let's go and get into some gameplay. Here we are, top tier, on... what's the map called? Arctic region, there we go.
So, we can see what we can do. Now, on this map, what you tend to find, even after the changes, you tend to find that the heavy tanks drive down to kind of the H8 sort of region, fight it out on that corner. And more mobile machines tend to head up the 1 line and 2 lines. Something like that. There's a guy in the Valentine just whinging about never being top tier. It's not that the Valentine is never top tier, it's just that when you're not top tier in the Valentine, you really, really notice it because, well, it's garbage. Frankly, even when the Valentine is top tier, it's pretty darn bad. Anyway, I digress. We're talking about the A-43, not the Valentine. Speaking of which, coincidentally enough, I'm actually recording this on Valentine's Day. Anyway, what we've got. We have got some guys over here. So there's a Panzer III-4, there's a Hetzer off in the distance, taking up a pretty typical tank destroyer. Let's be generous and say a sniping location. We've lost our T-28, T-67, T-34 and M5 Stuart already for absolutely nothing in return. Panzer, managed to get 1 shot into him. If he's just going to sit there, I can keep shooting him. 2nd shot into him and set him on fire. And he burns to death. Hurrah! Kill number 1. And there you can see that the rate of fire on this gun's pretty decent. And when you're top tier, the slightly dubious alpha damage is perfectly fine. You know, a 75mm gun in a tier 6 game is pretty respectable. T-34 over there, alas, I can't get a shot onto him. It's a pity. Light tank, however, AMX-40, I can probably put that guy out of his misery, but there's also a Churchill off to the distance, so I'm going to prioritise the Churchill because it's a more important machine. But then he fades off into the fog of war, and hello Mr. AMX, 1 shot into him, and so long, sweet prince. Don't have a shot on the KV, but do have a shot on the Churchill, alas, someone else picks up the kill. So we've managed to even it up a bit at 3 kills to 4. And both teams have lost a pair of top tier tanks. We just lost a Hetzer. So there's the Valentine, the unlucky guy from earlier on who wishes he was top tier, which is understandable. And there's myself and a Cheeto in the vicinity, and the thing with the Valentine is that the gun sucks, the mobility sucks, the armour is not actually very good, and when you're in a tier 6 game, the armour is basically meaningless. And the guns on both myself and the Cheeto are perfectly capable of ripping him apart. Especially from the rear. 3rd kill. So 6 kills, place 7. Using that mobility to relocate, as the enemy appear to, well, maybe be breaking through to the south. But no, as it turns out, there's only, oh no, there's a fair few enemy tanks down there, but we do have some tanks to contain them, so trying to get down there to lend a hand, being a little bit cautious in the process, or at the same time, while doing it, and there's a Hetzer. In fact, there's a pair of Hetzers. No Hetzer and a Hellcat, sorry. Hetzer is down, and the scorelines are even at 7 kills apiece. And we're doing almost 60 kph, trundling along here. So this is by no means a slow machine. This is a very mobile machine, as I've said before. Scoreline is 9-7. So what have we got down here? We have a Hellcat, Hellkitty. Sorry about that. A T-150 who just took an artillery shell to the face, which generally offends, let's be honest. But rather than just rushing straight into the front of those guys, I'm going to see if I can come up behind them and give them a bit of surprise rogering from behind. There's also the enemy artillery now been spotted at A9, but I reckon the Cheeto is perfectly capable of doing something about that fellow. So, the mobility, perfectly good enough to come up behind these fellows, but oh good lord, that's the front of a Churchill Mark 7. And a KV-85, but I'm going to struggle to penetrate the Churchill. We lose our Panzer 4, but if the Churchill just gives me his side armour, yeah, I can pen that. I take a shot for my troubles, and I'm kind of trying to go hull down to make shots at me harder, but this thing doesn't really have the gun depression to do that with any great ease. But I managed to sneak a shot through his side armour there. KV-85 has terrible gun depression. If that guy's going to come for me, well, he's going to have problems. 2 more shots should finish this chap off, so I just make sure the shots are planted straight through his tracks so that he can't even move in the process. And there's kill number 4. Just leaves a Churchill and the ARL-44. Shooting at the front of a Churchill like this is a bit of a mug's game, but I've got the ammunition to just throw some shots at him anyway. And somehow, and I really don't know how, but somehow that penetrated. The shot might have gone through his mud guards at the front. That is a weak spot on the Churchill. And that just leaves this ARL-44. And he's down on 8 health. Can we ninja the kill? Yes, we can. And that's a Top Gun. So, you saw that the gun has a good rate of fire. Penetration is perfectly adequate in a tier 6 game. Alpha damage is perfectly adequate in a tier 6 game. One thing, I mean, I didn't get shot at all that much, but despite the fact that this has better armour than the Cromwell, the armour's still not very good. I don't think I bounced anything. Someone shot me, I took damage. That's the way it works. So you basically tank with your health. It's preferable to not really try tanking with this tank, as odd as that sounds. Anyway, have a look at the post-battle results, and then we'll jump into a game where we are at the bottom of the feeding pool. Here is our bottom tier game, and this is actually the first game I ever played on the Stalingrad map. This is Stalingrad, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, Stalingrad. Had to think for a moment. As I say, I haven't really played much on this, so, you know, there's my excuse and I'm sticking to it. So, it's clearly a tier 8 game, that's why I'm showing it. So we are a small fosh. I'm not a fosh. Fosh is French. We're a small fish in a big pond.
Oh, small fosh, right?
Add to that the fact that this is a city map. You know, if you're going to be a small fish in a big pond, it's nice to have a really big pond so that you can find somewhere to hide. City maps don't really give you that many hiding places, which can be a little bit awkward. So, bear in mind, first game, so I, you know, may well do things wrong, but initially I just come down to the more open flank to try and get some spots, see what I can see. And because it leaves things a little bit more open, or I thought it would leave things a little bit more open, although looking at the open flank, quote unquote, it's not really that open, is it? I mean, the terrain's really undulaty and undulaty? Because that's a word. Undulates a lot. Oh, hello, Type 62. And so it can be awkward to run away. Now, head-to-head fight with the Type 62, despite the fact that he's a light tank, he's also, and I'm a medium, he will win. He's a tier higher than me, he actually gets a bigger gun than I do. I've got a 75mm gun, he's got an 85mm gun. Neither of our armour is worth anything much, so that was not a good trade. I took an 85mm shell to the face for no return. Not a great start, but relocating because I do not want to be fighting a Type 62 on my own. We've lost a T-44 and a T-34-85, and, you know, my amazing driving skills found out that that part of that building is not destructible. As I said, first game on this map, so I don't really know where I'm going or anything. And I'm just kind of driving around, kind of exploring, and my god, my driving skills were bad. That's crud. You're not going to be able to drive through it. God, sometimes I'm an idiot, I really am. Anyway.
Sometimes.
We're just going to try and relocate and see if we can possibly find somewhere that we can be useful. We just lost another one. Oh, we gained one back. So we've lost a tier 8, a tier 7 and a tier 6, and the enemy has lost a tier 8 and a tier 6. They're kind of ahead. But, ooh, targets. Rear of a Type 59. Let's see if I can annoy him sufficiently. One shot into him. Oh, no, he decides to put some cover between myself and him. Panther 2, Panther 2, Panther 2. There we go, one shot into him. Don't want to take a return shot. I take one, but my tracks eat it, and I manage to get a second shot into that fellow. And yeah, my driving skills are not very good. So we're just basically driving around trying to make ourselves a nuisance. And have you just spotted on the minimap, there are a bunch of tanks, including a light tank, which is going to be that Type 62, heading for our artillery. Or at least in the vicinity of that open flank. Our team has pulled it back a bit, so that now the scoreline is 6-5, 7-5. But Type 62 has gone for artillery. And so I'm trying to go back to help out our artillery if I possibly can. Now, as I said, one-on-one engagement, A-43, Type 62, the A-43 is just outmatched in pretty much every respect. There's also a KV-85 over there. Okay, screw this. Our artillery's dead and there isn't much I'm going to do about it. So just trying to find a different engagement where I can actually be useful. T-28 Prot's in trouble. My elite driving skills are shown once more. And you can see that just driving around, this thing is definitely mobile machine. You know, the gun's a little bit weedy, but it's a mobile machine, which is nice. ARL, put a shot into him, and T-34 polishes him off. Scoreline reads 8-7. Type 62 and KV-85 are looping round, and they appear to be going after one of our T-34s, who is engaging their attention. And this is a much better engagement for me, because I can just come in, and while these guys are distracted with someone else, plump shots into them. T-34 finishes off that KV-85, and now I can make this Type 62 move, and dislodge him, and the T-34 can go to work on this guy. Now, this light tank is really doing the wrong thing. He's just sitting there and letting me circle to him and shoot him. He manages to blow my tracks off with that shot, so my shot goes a little bit doolally. And I apologise for replay derperies. Patch 9.4 replays seem to be rather dubious. He only has 2 shots left in him. There we go. And I managed to pick up a ram kill at the end. Lost almost all of my health in that engagement, but it did the job. KV-85 and the Type 62 both died, and I'm just again relocating to see if I can possibly pick up a kill on the Ferdy or some damage on the Chiri, or possibly do something about the enemy artillery. Ferdy goes down. Oh crud, there's the Chiri. I bounce on him. I mean, Jesus Christ. Yes, I just bounced on a Chiri. Oh well. Chiri is using the the non-auto loading gun, and he's got the stock turret. The enemy artillery's down, so I'm just going to sit around and watch this guy's demise, which doesn't take too long. So the main thing you could see from that replay was the mobility of the A-43, which is very good. The gun's a little bit weedy, but the mobility is good. But even there, tier 8 game, worst matchmaking you're going to see on a city map. So, you know, you have to be a little bit careful. If you get caught out by a heavy tank down an alley or a tank destroyer, that can be really messy. But we still managed to do a respectable amount of damage, certainly more damage than we have health. I think it was a second class mastery, and didn't fire a single round of APCR. So, make of that what you will. The gun may not be the best, but it's good enough to get the job done. So take a look at the post-battle results, and then we'll jump back into the garage to round things off.
Overall, what do I think about this machine? It's damn good fun. If you have a look at my overall statistics for it, 82 games played, 66% win rate, ace tanker, good damage ratios, 73-ish% on Mark of Excellence, a Top Gun, 2 Confederates, a Scout and a Patrol Duty. It's a nice machine, but it's often overlooked or often derided. Why? Well, the gun isn't particularly exciting. It's the same gun selection that you had on the tank a tier lower, but if you use the 76mm gun, it's actually no worse, really, than the guns that you get on the American medium tanks. People can complain about the gun depression, and that's a legitimate complaint. The gun depression is not very good. And the thing is, this tank gets compared an awful lot to the Cromwell, which is inevitable, because they are easily the two fastest tier 6 medium tanks, realistically, the two most mobile. The Cromwell came first. The Cromwell has a punchier gun. The Cromwell's more exciting. The Cromwell gets better gun depression. You know, the Cromwell's got a higher top speed, so people think it's faster. But what they neglect is that the soft stats, the stats that you don't see in the garage, so things like your ground resistances between your suspension and the ground, your gun blooming values when you're on the move, when you're turning the turret, all of this jazz. In I think every category, or almost every category, in terms of soft stats that you don't see in the garage, the A-43 is superior to the Cromwell. It also has better armour. I mean, the thickness is not actually that dissimilar, but on the A-43 it's sloped. And so I think people are a little bit harsh on this machine, unfairly. The comparison saying that it is a tier 6 Soviet Cromwell is not a bad one. But, and I guess here's the thing. If you already own a Cromwell and you enjoy it, you would probably also enjoy playing the A-43. But there's no point you getting the A-43, because the two tanks have such a similar playstyle that, well, the Cromwell's probably better off for you. Or you've already got it, so why bother going anywhere else? The Cromwell is also slightly more flexible, with a slightly punchier gun and the better gun depression. By the same token, if you decide to buy this and keep it, there's very little point going out and buying and keeping a Cromwell. You're basically getting a similar package. And as the Cromwell was first, you know, this was always bound to be compared probably unfavourably with it. The fact that it's got this dirty grey weak spot, I say weak spot, but this dirty grey area on top for people to shoot means that you can't really go hull down at all. So, people can complain about it and find it a very awkward machine, but, and I'm rambling on here an awful lot. What is the bottom line? This is not a bad tank. If you can get past the slightly lackluster penetration and accuracy, if you're using the 76mm gun, on the guns, and the dodgy alpha damage, if you can look past that and see the very high DPM, it might be the highest of any of the tier 6 medium tanks, but don't quote me on that. Good mobility, the armour that can occasionally work, but you shouldn't rely on it. I say good mobility, excellent mobility. The much better soft stats compared to the Cromwell. Then what you get is a tank that is not painful to play in the slightest. It's a pleasurable machine to play, and the grind is easy and painless, in my opinion. This is a damn good tank in its own right. It just gets overshadowed by the similar British medium tank that was already in the game when this was introduced, i.e. the Cromwell. So, this is not a bad machine, but you're probably not going to keep it if you already own the Cromwell, and if you like this sort of fast medium tank gameplay, there's a pretty good chance you do already own that machine. Am I going to keep this? No. Why? Well, I think you've already guessed the reason. That's right, because I already own a Cromwell with a very good crew in. And so there's very little incentive for me to keep the A-43. If I didn't already own this, yeah, I'd probably keep it. I'd probably keep the A-43, because it's a damn fun little tier 6 machine. And I do recommend people giving it a go. It's often overlooked, and I think unfairly so. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed that review, possibly even found it vaguely informative. If you did, please feel free to catch some of my other videos and or subscribe to my channel, and I wish you very happy hunting on that battlefield. Ciao ciao.